There we go. Good afternoon once again. Jeff Benson, Builders Risk Program Manager for Victor Builders Risk. What we're going to do today is talk about in depth about the ISO protection class. It seems like kind of a narrow topic, but yet I think it's one of the most important things we talk about in property insurance. And so, as always, our emphasis in these educational workshops is Builders Risk for us. That's our product. But everything we talk about today related to ISO protection applies to all property. I was thinking about this. It applies to personal lines, homeowners, commercial lines, builders risk, any type of property. One of the main rating factors, rating basis, has been and always will be the ISO protection class. And it's very, I'd almost say it's misunderstood because the questions we get every day are interesting to say the least. And I will say that this is one of the things that there is an exact answer. It's not a negotiated thing. I have some agents that say, well, I think it should be this. And you might hope it's something, but it is what it is. And we're going to give you the parameters today, how they determine what it is. And we're going to talk about that in great detail. But a little brief example of property insurance, as I know we've had other workshops on this, but if you think about the standard COPE factors that we talk about: construction, occupancy, protection, exposure. So construction is pretty simple. What's it made out of? Frame, masonry, non-combustible, fire resistive, non-combustible, etc. Occupancy for permanent insurance, obviously the occupant's very critical. And in builder's risk, we want to know, is it ground up new, is it remodeling, renovations, and so on. The third one in that is the protection. And that's really the ISO protection. That's where it starts. What is the protection class? And it might morph into other sprinkler systems and stuff like that. And the last thing is this exposure, like where is this thing located? Is it on top of a mountain? Is it on the beach somewhere? So what we're going to focus on today, though, is the protection aspect of COPE. And in particular, we're going to talk about ISO protection classes. So, and what we'll do is run through this in 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. Because even though we all think we know all of this, even me, when I was preparing for this, a few things popped up that I didn't know. I thought I knew it all, and I guess I didn't. So we'll have fun going through this today. Okay, let's advance this. Advance to, there we go. So we can abbreviate this and call it the PPC program. I never hear anybody call it that. I just keep calling it the ISO protection class. That's what I do, insurance office protection class. And I think that's what you'll hear most people in the industry call it, is the ISO protection class. And there's a little history of here of what, why it was established, but it's been around for many, many years. It is the standard in the industry. I'm not going to get into this. There are a few states that kind of come up with their own protection classes. Washington, Louisiana are two that jump out at first, but they're kind of based on ISO too. It's not that different. Same factors are applied and stuff. So we'll get to that. So this is one of the key rating bases, one of the key rating factors for builder's risk. And like I said earlier, for all property insurance. To give you an idea, one classification difference going from let's say you go from a 6 to a 9, the property premium can double or triple sometimes, or sometimes the risk is ineligible simply because it's unprotected. So we'll get into that's how important this is. So what is this? I hear this all the time about what is this ISO protection class? And it's funny, if you're at a party and someone asks you, I don't think you want to quite go into as much detail as this, but it really is simply based on fire protection. And there's certain broad categories, but each community in the United States is assigned a class. And presently there's 41,177 communities under the ISO protection class system. I'll say that again, over 41,000 communities are rated by ISO protection class. So just think about that. We're going to get into that a little bit. I'm going to give you some other statistics I think you'll find very interesting and useful. So what ISO does is they analyze each separate community for certain characteristics. And I'll go through it in a little more detail, but it's the fire department, it's the water supply, it's the training of the staff, the equipment on the staff, response time. There's different things they go into. But this is a numerical approach, so it's not subjective on their part. They assign a number based on all of these factors. They total up the number. Whatever that total is, that is what that community is assigned. So, and it ranges from class 1 being the best to class 10 being unprotected. So if you don't know this, 1's a good, 10's not so good. How's that? But class 1, to give you a little background too, people don't know this because everybody says, oh, I think it's a 1. I guess I could throw this out as a poll question. That'd have been funny, but I wonder what percent of all communities in the United States have received a protection class 1 by ISO. It is 0.08 of 1%. So it's actually less than 1% of all communities are a protection class 1. There is 348 PC1s out of 41,000 rated communities. Not too many ones out there, guys. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Because I have some agents like, I think it's a 1. That's their go-to class. When they don't know, they'll say, I think it's a 1. I appreciate your sense of whatever that is, but it's probably not accurate. So what this really does is, like I said, it kind of removes subjectivity. ISO goes out and analyzes the community for all of these different characteristics and determines it's pretty scientific, and they determine basically what that protection class is, not only for local fire departments, they probably get funding based on this, but I don't know if any of you are personalized agents out there, but when you try to sell a homeowner's policy and you go to one of your carriers and it's a PC10, you can tell me how much more the premium is going to be than if it was a PC3. You know, double, triple, maybe more, higher deductibles. And like I said, some companies say we don't do 10s, or we won't do 10s over a certain value, or whatever that may be. This is, I keep saying it's objective. So I do get a lot of agents that call me and they say, Jeff, I know it says it's a 9, but you know, my uncle said that, you know, the fire hydrant's working and it's really a 6. Like, I do appreciate their sense of storytelling, but we have to go by what ISO has it classified as. I will say there's times where ISO is a little delayed in updating a classification, but we have to go with what's out there. That's small property underwriters are going to say the same thing. So once again, over 40,000 fire response jurisdictions in the United States, 41,000 to be exact. So let's talk about this, because this really comes up a lot. This is their rating scale. This is how they evaluate one community to another one. First one, emergency communications, is 10 points. So if you have, you know, a good radio system, satellite system, you can get up to 10 points. The next piece of this is the fire department itself. That's 50 points. Almost 50% of the rating is based on the fire department itself, and that is the equipment, you know, the maintenance program on the equipment, the number of firefighters, the training on the firefighters, the response time of the firefighters. That's 50 points out of a scale of 105 is the fire department itself. The water supply is the next. This is the thing that gives agents fits. So the water supply is this. So do they have working fire hydrants? Do they have adequate water pressure? Are the pipes big enough? We've had some where the developer puts in the wrong pipes and it didn't meet the standards from ISO, so they didn't get the protection class they wanted. These things can make the difference between a 1 and a 10. I've actually seen very narrow distances where these classes are dramatically different, and I'll give you some examples in a little while. And then there is 5.5 points for community risk reduction. Sometimes that carries you over the top. And I will say, it's not only, we're going to talk about volunteer fire departments. Some of them rank very high on the fire department side of it. Sometimes they lack the water supply, though, and that hurts. But a volunteer fire department can get very high ratings sometimes. This is really where the rubber meets the road on protection classes, and this is really how we price our product. So, and I can kind of summarize it a little bit more. So protected, so when a property underwriter tells you it's protected from an ISO protection class standpoint, that means, at least for our program, it means 1 to 8. We have one rate for a 1 to 8 classification. We might have A little different underwriting guidelines if it's a 7 or an 8, but the rate's probably going to be the same whether it's a 1 or an 8. The big distinction is once you go to a 9. Once you go to a 9, it's considered unprotected. And you can see 10 means it's literally completely unprotected. Usually we see more 9 and 10s in the mountain states when they're building something on top of a mountain. There's a very, very good chance it's a 9 or a 10. And that was the one example I was going to give you. We see places like Southern California. Los Angeles is a great example where it could be a 3 down in the valley and a 10 on the top of a mountain because there's no water supply. So you see it's all based on water supply, not just the fire department. What else? The other thing too is in mountain states, what happens in the wintertime? Things freeze. So let's say, oh, my water supply is a local pond. Well, if the pond is frozen over, that's not a very good water supply to put out a fire. I don't think we can throw snowballs at it. So you can see how the exposures for a 9 and 10 are much more dramatic than if they have a water supply in a fire department. And every company looks at this a little bit differently, but this is kind of it. Most companies are going to say 1 to 8 is protected, 9 and 10 unprotected. So we've already talked about the impact of a higher class. It affects pricing dramatically. It impacts the eligibility. Most programs will say, okay, I'll do up to 3 million in a 9, but I'm not going to do any more than that in a 9. But if it's 1 to 5, then I'll do higher. That's what you're going to have to, and you need to talk to your underwriters about that. But most of them have pretty set guidelines. The reinsurers are pretty big on that. So now we have this other thing, which is called split classes. And ISO, in its infinite wisdom a few years ago, changed everything around. It used to be you'd see a 6/9. So that was pretty self-explanatory. Parts of the jurisdiction were a 6, and the other parts were a 9. Usually it was based on fire hydrants. If there's not a fire hydrant within 1,000 feet of that address, then it's going to be at least a 9 if it's not within 1,000 feet. The other thing that's written in stone is it has to be, the individual address has to be within 5 miles of a fire department. We get this all the time, where we run a report and it'll show that this address is 9 miles from the nearest fire department. And yet you guys will tell me, oh, it's a 6. It's impossible. If it's over 5 miles from a fire department, it has to be at best a 9. That's just the written in stone. That's not the Jeff Benson rule. It's just the way it is. I speak specifically when you think about fires in today's world, you think about brush fires, wildfires out west, Texas, other places. This is critical too, because what we're seeing is more and more development. We're a builder's risk program, and we write a lot of ground up new construction. And you see a lot more development in the outlying areas. So as they move outside of the traditional city limits and build houses and offices, wherever they're building, a lot of times they're in an unprotected territory. So it can go from a 3 to a 9 within a couple blocks. I've even seen it go from a 3 to a 9 when it's across the street, believe it or not, because across the street is not within 1,000 feet of a working fire hydrant. So anyway, it is what it is, guys. We have to understand the effect of this. The good news is, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it appears that the 9 and 10 is actually diminishing, because as they build more fire stations, they put in more working fire hydrants, the sheer amount of acreage that is now 9 and 10 is diminished. The bad part is, where do you think people are building the biggest houses? So if you have a lot of money and you want to build a multi-million-dollar home, maybe you want to build it on top of the mountain because you want to. Unfortunately, on top of the mountain is a 9 or a 10. So you've taken that project, which is probably already expensive to insure, and doubled or tripled the premium because it's now a 9 or a 10. But that's just something we have to factor in, is where they're building these things. So I guess I was just kind of ahead of myself here, but mountainous terrain is just something, when I look at the sheer amount of 9 and 10 that's in the United States, it's dominated in the mountain states, be it in the Appalachian Mountains and the East Coast, the Rocky Mountains, the West Coast. A lot of these areas are 9 and 10 for the reasons we talked about. You know, they can't get the fire equipment up there. There's no water supply, just simply not enough fire stations. We do see the 9 and 10s in the more rural areas, just the way it is. A lot of times they rely on volunteer fire department, which is not the problem in itself. If it's well trained and they have good equipment and the response time is adequate, usually what we find in the rural areas, the problem is going to be the water supply. You know, they have to rely on a body of water to get the water for the trucks. Maybe they have some tanker trucks, but even the tanker trucks are evaluated based on their flow rate. It's very scientific. So how much water can they put on a fire, how quickly? That's all very scientific. I will say the fire departments are very, very proud of where they're rated. And people are always asking me, how do I know what the protection class is? You got really two good sources. The first source I would say is call the fire department. They should know. When you talk to them, if you tell them where it's at, they're probably going to say that part of the town is a 3. So they'll give you a lot of information. The other one too is sometimes your state insurance department produces things that will help you out of the protection classes. What you got to be careful of though is, for example, I live in Jacksonville, Florida, 740 square miles, and you'll see Jacksonville is actually a PC1, one of the few communities it's a 1, but that's only part of the community. So depending on where they're building, might be a 1, might be a 10, might be a 9. You never know. So it really does depend on the individual address. The best of all is to communicate with your underwriter, and we'll get that figured out. So once again, on these split classes, used to be 6/9. Now you'll see 6/4X or 4Y. So part of what's that saying is part of the community is protected. It's a 4. But part of the community might be a 4X or a 4Y, which means that part of the community is unprotected. In other words, it's a 9 or a 10. And so those rates will apply, which means much higher rates. Usually it's one of two things. Part of the community is over 5 miles from the nearest fire department, or that address is over 1,000 feet from an adequate working fire hydrant. So you could have those split classes. Confusing sometimes. Agents will call me and say, it's a 4X, it's protected. You just told me 4X is not protected. You might as well be saying it's a 9 or a 10. So probably the 4X would be a 9 and not a 10. And 9s are better than 10s, by the way. 9 shows there is some protection. 10 says there's really nothing. So. And I just want to mention this too, because sometimes the volunteer fire departments actually get a bad rap. And I said, I've seen some volunteer fire departments that are PC3, rated very highly, as long as they have the water supply. And like I said, the proper equipment, the maintenance programs, the training of their staff. It does have to be manned. They can't, I know some volunteer fire departments aren't manned all the time. It's hard to be a good fire department if you're not manned all the time. But some are very good, so it's not just based on that. Another great source of information, though, you can go to their websites. I do sometimes, and when they buy new equipment, sometimes they'll be reclassified by ISO. So it's a great source of information. If you're going to be writing property insurance in any given community, I would contact the fire department and have that conversation. Good little tip for you on this. So that was kind of my talk on protection classes, and we're going to open it up to questions now. But like I said, it can make a major difference in the underwriting of property risk on what the protection class is. So as always, if you have a question, you can pick up the phone and call me anytime, but talk to your underwriters. I always put this slide up for our program. This is the pass-through risk. You can see we classify 1 to 7 on the PC protection class side as a pass-through. So if it meets these qualifications and it's a 1 to 7, it's going to flow right through the system. And we call that, the IT people call that the happy path. So that's what we're looking for. But whatever builder's risk needs you have, pick up the phone and call me. We're here to help you. And I think, Darcy, we're going to open it up to questions now and see what they have to say.
All right, Jeff. First question, how frequently does the ISO reevaluate a community's protection class?
Good question. So how often do they do it? Now, I think I don't know the exact answer, but I do know if there's been a material change. Like I said, they've got new equipment, they've increased their staff, the developer has put in fire hydrants. The community can request ISO to reclassify, to come out and reevaluate. So I'm not so sure there's a set pattern. It's going to be the community has to request it. We had an example here in Jacksonville where they built a new community, and unfortunately they didn't put in the fire hydrants in the right places. And so everybody was a 10. So they thought they were in town, and they started getting their homeowners insurance premiums, and the community was not happy. So, but they put the fire hydrants in, notified ISO, they came out, did their new reevaluation, and now they're like the rest of Jacksonville, they're a PC1. So I would say that's the community and the fire department have to be involved in that. Good question.
All right, next question. Do you know if there is a database online that can identify the protection class at a specific address?
Yeah, see, the issue we have here is ISO is very, very proud of their data. It's a proprietary system, so they charge for lookups. And some carriers build that in as a third-party verification. Or even a lot of times the developers, the property owners association, they're going to know. And if it's protected, that's all you really got to determine. Even if you don't know it's exactly, it's 4, 5, or 6. If it's a 4, 5, or 6, we're okay. If it's a 9 and you tell me it's a 1, we're not okay. How's that? So I think you can get pretty close just by doing a little investigative work. And most of the agents that have been doing this for any length of time know, what the protection classes are in different parts of town. I will say it gets a little tricky on new developments. That's where you got to work with your fire department on that. I'd give them a call. Good question.
All right. What is considered protected and unprotected?
So I'm an old school property underwriters, and I can give you my definition of that, but I would say whichever carrier you're dealing with, you need to talk to your underwriters, because I've seen bands of rates. Some companies will have a rate for 1 to 3, 4 to 6. They put 7 and 8 in the band, and then usually 9 and 10 are in their own special band. For our program, like I said, we have one rate for protection class 1 to 8, and then we have another rate for 9 and 10. And just to give you an idea, depending on the construction, frame, for example, you're looking at least double the rate if it goes to a 9 or a 10. And we do ask more questions, but that's just how we interpret it for our program.
All right. How does the ISO determine the 5-mile radius? Is it by number of miles driven?
So we actually can get that information off one of our systems, and I do think it's driving distance, because I think as the crow flies wouldn't do us much good, would it? So I don't think they're taking helicopters. Well, they might be out west, but yeah. So I think it's driving distance. What's the nearest point within 5 miles from the driving distance to that? It has to be within 5 miles. Good question. And what we've seen, I saw this recently in Texas. They built a big, really nice subdivision, $2-3 million homes. But I guess they didn't factor this in, and they determined they petitioned the local fire department, because the fire department was over 5 miles away, and the fire department came and put a substation in, which qualified as a location, and then it made the whole development protected. Made a big difference to the developer. I think it's something they're all starting to think about as they develop these subdivisions. I can't believe that they wouldn't do that beforehand. You're talking to someone here in Florida, and you guys, I don't know if you have any idea how much we're paying for homeowners down here, but the last thing I want to do is double or triple it. Good question.
All right. Is one water source better than another? For example, a pond versus a main or even large water containers?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an engineer, but I mean, ISO has their, a lot of it is based, I always heard it called delivery. And it's really based on how many gallons per minute they can put on a fire. And so whether they're getting it from a pond or they're getting it from a tank or from a truck, it's very scientific. So, you know, I would think, I mean, logic would tell me you could deliver more water quickly with a tank, but then you might run out. So I guess you got to factor that in too. Not only how fast can you deliver it, but what's the volume of water available to you. But there is a formula for that. Interesting enough too, I've seen some rural areas where they put in these, and I can't remember the name right now. It's not called a stand pipe, but basically they have these pipes already in place around a lake. And so all the fire department has to do is come and attach their equipment to this pipe, and it automatically draws water from the bottom of the body of water, be it a lake or a pond or whatever. Pretty slick. Start to see more and more of that in some of the rural areas. To me, that would make it a lot quicker. So that would improve their response time along with the ability to deliver a lot of water quickly.
All right. Can you write wood frame projects if the protection class is 9 and 10?
For our program, we write single family detached dwellings. That's the number one thing we write. We write other things too, and so most of those are frame. And yes, we do write frame in 9 and 10. But like I said before, our rate's going to be much higher than if it's not. If it's 1 to 8, it's much lower rate. And we ask a lot more questions in the 9 and 10. A lot of this is around fire protection. We will actually ask responding fire department, how do they do it? What's their equipment? We ask very particular questions before we do it. And we'll probably increase the deductible for a 9 and 10, but we do it. But I will say a lot of companies have had poor loss experience, and they just simply won't do frame in 9 and 10. So once again, you need to pick up the phone and call your underwriter, find out what the deal is on that. But that's a good point too. If you think about, remember I said COPE, construction, occupancy, protection, exposure. So what is the number one exposure to frame? I mean, I know the wind blows it down sometimes and this and that, but it's probably fire. So this protection class is all based on fire protection. So it has the most of what we're talking about, has the most impact on frame buildings. Doesn't mean that a masonry non-combustible building can't burn up, but frame is even more exposed. And think about these wildfire, brush fire areas when they're building frame houses, depending on what the roof's made out of. There's a lot of exposure out there. And I will say this, what they've done out west is you continue to see these homes, very nice homes, being built right on the edge of national forests. So that's beautiful. You got a great view, but those national forests are not maintained. And so there's a lot of combustible material. And now we've built this $3, $4, $5 million home right on the edge of a national forest. It gives property underwriters like me nightmares. I wake up at night thinking about that. So we do underwrite. I do know there's some carriers that will not do 9 and 10 out west anymore. And we take a very close look at that too. We might not do it either, depending on the location. Because these wildfires are they're growing in intensity and size. So it's always something to worry about.
All right, Jeff, it looks like we are at time, so we'll just do one quick question. Okay. For property class purposes, does the fire hydrant need to be connected to the main?
It has to be a working fire hydrant. That's a good question, because we've actually had subdivisions where they put in all the fire hydrants, but they didn't connect them yet. So ISO will not improve your protection class until they're actually working fire hydrants that have been tested. And we had a situation in Texas where they put in the fire hydrants, they connected them, but they put in inadequate size piping, so it couldn't deliver the flow rate that was required So let's hope that doesn't happen in your area. But just another one of those things where the developers need to be aware of this. And I'm sure if they simply contacted ISO, they would tell them what you need to do, the minimum criteria. Good question. So yeah, if you have any other questions, Darcy, they can send them in and we'll get answers to them, okay?
Absolutely. All right, we are at time for today. So thank you, Jeff, for answering all of our questions and giving us this presentation.
Very good. I'd just like to say goodbye. I appreciate your time today. Let's go write some builder's risk. There's our contact information for myself and Donna. Give us a call anytime, drop me a note. And if you ever want to talk about protection classes, you can see I'm kind of geeky about this. I love to talk about them. They're pretty interesting. So let's you all have a good day and let's go write some business. Thanks, Darcy.
Thanks, Jeff.